My name is Robin King. I'm president of Imagina Corporation, which is an independent consulting company, and we specialize in education, training, facilities development on a global basis. I was the founder of the computer animation program at Sheridan College in 1982. So that's, 29 years ago. My first SIGGRAPH, I think, was 1979. In those days, of course, there was no field of study. There was no place where you could go to train people. There were no teachers. There was no commercial software. It was an entirely brand new industry. And I was convinced that the effect that digital technology would have on the creative process, particularly in animation, was going to be profound in the future. So I started the program in 1982. It probably took 12 or 15 years to mature, of course. And then, of course, when the industry started to kick in the mid-1990s or so many of our graduates were in a position to take major positions in companies like ILM and Pixar. So that was a very interesting developmental project. More recently, for the last 10 years, my company has been an international consulting company specializing in education and strategic projects in the Far East. Well, I would say that I'm really less concerned about the diversity of technology. I think diversity of technology is good. I mean, the sense that 2D, 3D, I don't mind if you animate with paper clips. I mean, story is the most important thing. Character is the most important. So the issue of technology to me is much less important than the central issue today, I think, which is, are we training people? Are people learning in appropriate ways? And I'm quite convinced that traditional education is obsolete, that the too many educational institutions are built on the 19th and 20th century production models, that the education process no longer fits today's reality when it comes to teaching and when it comes to learning. And so my kind of strategic thrust at the moment is to rethink how we are training and how we are educating people with respect to preparing them for a future which is going to be creative and flexible and unknown. And so I think it demands that educational institutions and independent trainers rethink the way that they teach and the way that they train. And that's the kind of central thrust of what we're doing now. It's a real problem. I mean, we all know that in this industry, in animation, the portfolio is what really matters. I think most people are less concerned with which institution you come from, although it is a factor. They're more concerned with, first of all, can you do the work? Are you a good animator? And secondly, and is strategically more important now, is are you a good team player? Are you a good creative person? How do you fit into our specific organization? I think those are pretty, key issues. I believe in standards to the extent that one can guarantee a quality of performance, if you will. I don't believe in standardization. In other words, the kind of creative flexibility that the best schools in the world have are based on a creative approach to content, an explorative, experimental approach to content, rather than a standardized, should we say, a Disney approach or an approach which is specifically, anime or Hollywood style. That's less critical than the kind of learning that people need to do today, which reflects both an independent as well as a corporate viewpoint. In other words, they have to be able to develop their independent skills within the context of production. Well, clearly there are some good schools out there. I'm not going to argue that there aren't some solid institutions out there. The problem that I have with formal education as it's practiced now is that it doesn't take advantage of the core kinds of 21st century learning skills that young people need to have nowadays. They are connected and networked in a different way. I'll give you a typical example. So many schools set up courses where the student is given an assignment, they have a week to complete it. They're then evaluated at some point at the end of that period of time. If it's not correct, they've probably moved on to another assignment because that's what's in the schedule. to me, animation is something that depends, that is geared towards rapid iteration. We learn by doing. We learn by experimentation. It should be quick. It should be rapid. It should be ubiquitous feedback. Those things don't exist in a formal education setting. So it seems to me that we need to create learning environments where we have a new set of a new paradigm, if you will, of learning skills that are suited to the kind of 21st century environment that we find ourselves in. And that, to me, the traditional institutions are like large ocean-going liners. They're very hard to stop, often impossible to turn around in a short period of time, and constrained by the kind of political and academic infrastructure of the formal ways of doing business. I don't believe that's the right way to do things. And what I'm trying to do now is to reinvent, or at least not to reinvent, but to build a new paradigm based on a set of principles that I think are more solid in terms of the way in which people need to learn for the future. Yes, the biggest challenge clearly in Asia is the kind of formality of the education system. I really sort of discovered this in the early days in the 80s when I went to Japan. And I interviewed and spent some time with the head of research at Sony. I said, "Where do you get your best engineers?" He said, "I go to the second-rate universities, because the first-rate universities, I can't pass their exams." Now, the issue there is that to a large extent across Asia, the formality of the education system is very difficult to deal with when it comes not only to the structure of education, but in terms of individual and personal self-expression. Because you lose face if you shine above everybody else. You don't have that level of individuality. It's much more difficult to find students who are prepared to stand out of the crowd, to think outside the box. So, having taught I've lectured in maybe 20 universities in mainland China alone. We started our own school in Beijing several years ago, in which we changed that paradigm by bringing in students who were prepared to think out of the box, and we tested them to do that, and built a school around a short training program to show that was certainly possible, that it's possible to bring that level of creativity if you provide the right kind of innovative and creative environment and the right kinds of teaching resources. So that was sort of level one of what we've been able to achieve in response to this kind of constrained learning environment. And all university and college students in China for the first 6 weeks had to go military training, for example. So they're marching by the thousands on college campuses. Which brings me to today. So what is it we're trying to do today to change this? Well, fortunately, I've been able to join up with an institution which is just emerging, the Beijing Detao Masters Academy. And what's attractive about this organization is that we're freely open and able to think outside of the box. We're going to bring in international animation and visual effects specialists to provide a training environment which we can now evolve according to the kind of principles we've been talking about. So it can involve ubiquitous evaluation, real-world training. We will be networked with the best in the industry. So the challenge is now to structure an environment, a creative environment in China, which will be in both Shanghai and Beijing, to create that kind of innovative and creative environment with international talent, and to be able to provide a prototype of a better way to do things. And that's our kind of strategic thrust now, is to rethink the educational process based on this notion of 21st century learning and how to optimize, in particular, the ways in which students have the opportunity to learn online access to information, online training, to find the best ways that we can integrate, if you will, a creative learning environment into what has been a traditional structure up till now.